Hello everybody, in today's video I am driving this, a 2006 Mercedes-Benz SLK350, one of the R171 generation cars, which is the second in the SLK lineage. I have in the recent past driven an SLK55, which, wild, crazy and very rare black series aside, is the top of the R71 tree. So in today's video, I'm going to be looking at this car, but also drawing a comparison with the 55. I want to say a big thank you to my friend Michael and his partner Alex for lending me their SLK55, which is actually of the same vintage as this. So I've been able to refresh my memory about that car and also park the two side by side to draw some quick comparisons. And what I want to find out today is, has the SLK350 lost anything over the 55? Would you notice? And more importantly, is it actually a better car? Because although the SLK55 is rather fun, it has a barnstorming engine, it's also a very flawed beastie. The interior is really just not good enough for a Mercedes, let alone an AMG in my opinion. The car also likes to shake, rattle and roll over every single bump it can find, and the automatic gearbox is a real letdown. So, what's different about the 350? Well, we park the two next to each other, and visually the differences are subtle, but they are there. So the front bumper has a very different design. It's a bit more aggressive on the 55, as you'd expect. At the rear, you'll find a little lip spoiler too, which gives the 55 that nice hint of aggression and finishes the rear off nicely. You also have a bit of a body kit on the side, so the sill on the 55 is just a little bit more pronounced. However, with this also wearing some very nice 18-inch wheels, it originally came on some 19-inch AMG replicas, you'd be hard-pressed to tell the two apart at a quick glance. Perhaps the one feature of the 55 I miss the most, especially when you're sat here, is what really looks like the cat's claws. There's three little silver pieces on each of the grills on the bonnet. Interior-wise, although the AMG hardly covers itself in glory, it is a little bit nicer than this. Mercedes were going through something of a dark patch in the early 2000s, and cars like this really show you how they were getting it wrong. The interior, it's just not good enough. There's no two ways around it. You've got lots of hard, scratchy plastics, cheap feeling vinyl, bad switch gear. These seats are leather, but the quality of the leather is poor. The 55, again, is a little bit better. It's not aged very well at all. However, it all still works, and there are some nice features like the air scarf, and on this car you move the headrest up and down and move the air scarf with it, so actually it's the best air scarf I've experienced thus far. I may have been getting that wrong on some previous cars, so if I've done that before, sorry. As you might expect, one of the biggest changes is to the power plant, where the AMG gets a 5.5-litre barnstorming V8. This gets a much more modest 3.5-litre V6. I believe derived from the same engine family. Where the AMG puts out a very healthy 350 plus horsepower, this makes do with closer to 270. However, it's torque where the big difference lies, because the AMG has more than 370 and this makes do with about 260. So you're talking about 100 odd pound-foot of difference in torque. And that's the sort of thing you are going to feel in the real world. These are not especially lightweight cars. They are much lighter, of course, than the SL, but they're still sort of ton and a half, 1.6, and so you do need torque to make progress effortless. The gearbox is also more or less the same. I'm sure there are detailed differences between the two applications, but fundamentally they're both AMG 7G-tronic units. This sadly is not a good thing. It's better than the old 5-speeder for sure, and left to its own devices on a cruise, the car can achieve relatively impressive economy. On the way down here, this car's owner David achieved about 35 to the gallon, which I think is very good. Even after doing all the drive-bys and things, the car's still saying 31.4 as a trip average over the last 200 miles and 4 hours of driving. Now in the AMG, you get for the transmission C, Comfort, S, Sport, and M, Manual mode. Here, you've got simply Comfort and Sport. Now in theory, you can change gear using the lever here, but eventually the car will go back into normal mode, and changing gear using a left and right lever is just a little bit weird. The AMG also gives you little buttons behind the steering wheel, but In this case, I don't think the loss of these things is actually that significant. Those buttons on the AMG are horrible to use. They're like an awful computer mouse that's got all gunked up with teenagers' sweat, and it's just not a very nice thing to operate. The gearbox is also very lethargic and not keen to respond at all. Now, what I'm going to do is put this car into sport drive, so it'll change gear on its own. We'll see what she's got. The car is certainly brisk, power is smooth and even, and she does make an alright sound when you're on it. This car is entirely standard, including the exhaust. The red line is similar to the AMG, just over 6,000 RPM, so if you're into your sort of high revving sports cars, this is not the car for you. On a road like this, the car is actually perfectly happy. It's got no real issues, and with this car's roof up, it creaks and rattles a hell of a lot less than the 55. But I'm not sure that's actually a model issue. I think potentially that particular car needs a little bit of adjustment. I have been told that if you're trying to activate the roof, which you can only do up to about walking speed, and you do go over a bump, that's enough to sometimes put the whole thing out of alignment and can cause quite a few creaks, rattles and other things. When the car's not being tested, this is actually pretty good. It's even got quite decent steering feel. Weights up nicely, and your Boxster owner is unlikely to be particularly impressed, but it's better, I think, than you might expect. Unlike the AMG, this automatic gearbox was actually an option. You could specify these with a 6-speed manual. It was in fact the last Mercedes convertible to offer that option with a V6. The later cars you could still get a manual, but only with the 4-cylinder, and in truth, a manual in any of these is actually a fairly rare thing indeed. I still have a major soft spot for a little Merc C-Class Coupe. Remember the little hatchback thing they did for a while? I had one of those with the C200K engine, the 2-litre supercharged lump compressor, and that had a 6-speed manual in it, and it was actually a really nice gearbox and engine combo. Visibility out is reasonable. This car, as you can probably see, has had a little fabric wind deflector installed, which I think is a genuine Mercedes item, and it does actually improve the feel in the cabin. Doesn't look particularly great. I love the SLs. We've got the little integrated folding one, but of course on the SLK you don't get some of those nicer features. There are some scratches and marks to the surround of the infotainment system here which don't look so good, but on the whole, despite the fact it's low rent, this interior has aged generally pretty well. The driver's side outer bolster, of course, has got the usual marks and scuffs you might expect, but that's not different to many other cars I've seen. This has also been a very reliable car. David's had it now for over 4 years. In that time, he's put on about 25,000 miles, and it has never broken. It also just cost him less than £200 to get a basic service and MOT done. So in that regard, these are actually a very decent car to get into. This is where things get a little bit complicated, because although I would love to say that a Boxster is an all-round better car, and as a sporty car, it certainly is, not everybody is interested in that sort of thing. And so for many people, the fact these are more durable, are reasonable to service, will appeal. Your SLK customer, particularly your SLK350 customer, is also far less likely to have ragged this car in the same way you'd find with a Boxster or even the AMG. But this car is far from perfect. I'd assumed that this, being the 350, would have a slightly softer, more supple, more cosseting suspension than in the AMG. And that is true. It is a little bit easier riding over the lumps and bumps. However, I thought that might mean the car was going to be a little less fidgety, a little less scuttle shaky when it came to the tricky stuff. That sort of thing really does detract from the whole premium quality feel you're supposed to get in a Mercedes. Sadly, This is not the case. You show this car an even remotely demanding road surface and it pretty much just disintegrates the same way as every other SLK I've ever driven, R171 included. It doesn't rattle as bad as some others I've experienced, but the shake in here is absolutely unforgivable, considering this was developed from the ground up as a convertible and was supposed to be considerably stiffer and better built than the old R170. You'd think it would be at least half decent, but it's just not. These cars also suffer from one of the biggest problems that afflicts all Mercs of this generation: rust. Despite a galvanized chassis, which again is supposed to be better than the old one, these do just melt. So if you're looking to buy one, do give it a thorough check over. Go online, find some buyer's guides, find out where these like to go, and just make sure you're not buying into something that could be hiding a rather nasty secret. This car had just a little bit of bubbling coming through on one of the rear arches and it was stamped on immediately. If you can get a car like that, or one that's been kept in a garage in the right conditions, etc, etc. These cars now are sort of 10 to 15 years old for the most part, and so they're at that real critical stage where rust will be coming through and owners have either dealt with it or you're going to have to deal with it. So do make sure you're not going to be the latter. Although it's not a glowing report card for the 350, this is definitely a car that I could see recommending to some people. Because it doesn't really like doing the manual bit, you're not really that worried about it, and that means that the performance being a little bit less than the 55 is not really relevant. It's got enough, and if you're coming from a sort of fairly ordinary hatchback, that sort of thing, this is still going to feel quick enough, I would say. It is still a Mercedes, and that means things to some people still. And when you're on a road like this that's not too demanding, the ride is absolutely fine. The visibility is lovely. The amount of wind in the hair is correct. The air scarf can be quite pleasant. You've got heated seats, so you'll be snug and warm even when it's quite chilly outside. And for the price you pay, this is a lot of car. When new, these were not particularly cheap. However, now you can pick one of these up for only a few £1,000s. Boxsters of late have shot up in value, but these not so much. Yes, a lot of the bottom end of the market will be the 230s, the older generation cars that need a lot of work, but if you can budget, say £3,000 to £4,000, you can get into a car that might not be a heap. Get about 5 or 6 grand, and it probably won't be a heap. For the keen driving enthusiast, a Boxster or a Z4 is probably going to be a much better choice. However, the Mercedes still does a reasonable job. The brakes are actually quite pleasant, they're fairly responsive but not overly servoed, unlike some other cars that I've driven. The steering also does have a decent weighting, and although the front end has just a touch of vagueness about it, you do always know what's going on with it, so it doesn't feel like it's a car that's ever going to surprise you. The gearbox also, in sporty mode, will change down without too much of a prod, and the car always seems to have a little bit left in reserve. It isn't that agile, and if you want to make small corrections mid-corner, not much really seems to happen. However, you get into a rhythm with it, work with the car, you can flow down a road nicely, and for the less demanding stuff, it's still very pleasant. So there we have it, that's the SLK350. I think for your more casual petrolhead, something like that Jag that's just gone past might be of greater appeal. It's certainly better as a cruiser, but you're going to be talking quite a lot more money. A Boxster then, a much better sports car, as is a Z4, but then no real surprises there, are there? The way really to see this is, should you buy right, as a very dependable, and perhaps unspectacular, but certainly faithful, sporty convertible that should be able to do the business all year round. Get a good one like this, and with the roof up, you do at least feel like it brings something to the party that the Z4 and the Boxster lack. Where then does this leave the SLK55? For many, it will be the cheap price of the 350 that draws people to it, and the AMG commands a fair premium. However, the better interior materials and thumping V8 engine really do turn it into a pocket muscle car. It will always be the unusual choice in this market, but that does not make it a bad one. In this segment, little else will match the joy of that power plant without serious compromise elsewhere. Anyway, thank you as ever for watching. Thanks to David for bringing his car out. Please like, comment down below, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and we shall see you for the next one. Bye-bye.